Okay, hi. So first of all, let me just say, who the hell made that countdown? It was like really good. So please tell me. Um, I am here a little bit late because I couldn't get my slides to load, but it's fine. Jamie, good job. I love it. Congratulations. um, I'm here today to talk about historical fashion and its influence on Lolita. Here's a cat. It's on this because I didn't know what else to put here. There was a frame and I put a cat there. Oh, hi Jamie. I really liked your countdown. It was so fancy. It was really beautiful. Okay, let me put my presenter notes because I have a lot of them. So yeah, historical fashion and its influence on Lolita. I'm particularly interested in this subject because you often hear that Lolita is inspired by historical fashion, and most people usually cite like, oh, it's like Victorian inspired, it's also like Rococo inspired, but there's a lot of eras in time where I don't necessarily think that people think about that we are pulling from, or like, certain fashions are revivals of other fashions. And also, certain time periods are really long, like the Victorian era is so long in terms of like fashion. So it's like, what specific trends or features or motifs are we pulling from in Lolita when we talk about Lolita. I got distracted by the cat discussion. But yes, please have a cat panel. Yeah, that's well Victorian, for some reason, like we use the term Victorian era for like our that time period, even though we're not like we didn't have a monarch at the time. I don't know. I don't know what the American variant is would be called. I don't think we like have a name for it besides Victorian, which is kind of weird. It's a bit weird. Anyway, uh, I'm Obsixwi. I am a Kuro and Gothic Lolita, also classic, but that's a secret. I do have a BFA in fashion design, which it's unused. I do not use it. My degree is very useless, and I have been in Lolita fashion for 10 years. Also, as a side note, just because I fashion that's not supposed to be like a I know things, because truly I do not. Oh, the slides aren't sliding? Damn it. Okay, hold on. Oh, okay. I see what's going on. They weren't like synced. Okay. So, Lolita fashion. So yeah, a lot of people refer to it as being influenced by Victorian children's fashion. But also really at its core, Lolita is like an amalgamation of different historical and cultural references. So I wanted to kind of go into depth about where certain things are coming from. Um, let's see. And because of like my own personal knowledge, which is shallow compared to the realm of fashion history as a whole, and because of timing, we're primarily going to be covering Western historical fashion's influence on Lolita, um, by and I'm mostly comparing it to like the main Japanese Lolita brands. I've thrown in like a couple of indie designs here and there, but I'm pulling off a Loliberry, so it is what it is. Also, I'm only going to be doing like pretty much dresses and skirts and like that kind of thing. I unfortunately cannot cover menswear, and like influence on OG, because that's not something I know enough about, and also time reasons. Um, I don't know anything. I am so sorry. I promise I tried really hard to like brush up on a lot of knowledge, but it's just we're covering a very wide range of time here, so there's probably things that are going to be inaccurate. I apologize. If anyone actually knows better, please feel free to call it out in the comments. I would love to be corrected. Um, So I will be comparing brand dresses to certain eras in fashion, but I don't necessarily claim that the dress that I am calling out was designed with that era in mind. I don't know necessarily what the designers were thinking, but some aspect of it probably just like spoke to something that I felt was another time period. Another thing to note is historical fashion is heavily romanticized in Lolita, but that doesn't mean it escapes like the scrutiny of like its colonial origins. I'm not trying to present history in an idealistic light, but I am trying to fairly convey like um, the origins of these fashions within what's going on at the time. I will not be covering anything about Prince and Lolita because that's just a whole another thing. I also won't be able to go very much into detail about like underwear, corsets, and like structure and that kind of thing. So mostly it's just going to be like basic dress shapes. Another thing to note before we start, I know this is like a very long intro. My images are mostly taken from images of like the wealthy and aristocratic because they are oftentimes like the most documented and they also are like on the forefront of fashion in the sense of they have the money to buy it, and also because they use it to display their wealth, and also because I think it's where Lolita fashion takes lots of its inspiration. So the history that I'm covering here is not a complete and accurate portrayal of things that people wore necessarily, just rich people. Oh, God, oh my God, we should actually after I'm not I shouldn't like be saying I want to do another panel because this was a nightmare for me because I did last minute. But I really wanted to do like a um, undressed fashion kind of inspired. Anyway, not related. I'll talk about it later. So another thing is like we're going to be calling out certain eras in time, but it doesn't necessarily mean that like if I say like oh like the 1820s or like oh the 1790s, it's kind of more fluid than that. I refer to periods of time where certain items are worn in certain ways, but does not mean that everybody is wearing them. Not everyone always wears the latest fashions because, like, if you're an older person, a lot of times you wear things that were popular when you were young. Like, if you're millennial, you wear skinny jeans. And and also like not everyone is going to be wearing the most extreme thing because oftentimes trends are extreme and we're looking at things that were maybe the most like things that stood out to us and that we take inspiration from. It doesn't mean that it's what everyone was wearing. And again, my knowledge is spotty in certain areas, so I might not be 100% accurate all the time. So I'm just here to chat and talk. I mean, true. I'm not. I own one pair of jeans. They are skinny, I guess. I don't know. I feel very brave owning at least one pair of jeans to encase my legs in. Okay, so first off, let's talk about silhouette. So oftentimes Lolita is broken down into like bell shape or A line, and we refer to the fullness of the skirt as the aspect that people say like, oh, that's the reason it's historically influenced because we have these like wide skirts. But Lolita has been in fashion for a really long time, and its shape and silhouette has changed over time as well. And so because the silhouette of Lolita fashion has always been ever changing, all of these different shapes can be said to be influenced by various historical eras. Not only a time where they're like is a skirt where it's a natural waist and full skirt, right? So here are just some examples. The first image is like the image that you get when you go to like live journal. No one does that anymore, but this was on like the Lolita guidebook where it's like, this is what a Lolita looks like. And then we also have some examples of other shapes that are, um, that are other shapes that are not this image from various points in the history of Lolita, which by the way, I have another video about history of Lolita if you want to watch that. But we're not going to go over that today, really. Um, And here are some other examples of shapes. We got, sack dresses, we got empire waist, we got, um, your T-length dresses, whatever. Lolita is not um, one shape, is what I'm trying to say. Okay, so now we're going to cover big skirts. We love it. That's what we're here for. So we are going to start in the 16 or the 1460s, I believe, which is kind of where you start to get like your first um, your first era in time. I want to say where you have like these structured undergarments to make your skirts really really big. Um, so uh, it comes from Spain. It's the Spanish farthingale, which is it's made out of at first I guess like stiffened grass. Um, Stiffened grass in like um, circles, and they're on top of each other. And later on, they were stiffened with other things like whalebone or wood or wire. All used from around the 1580s onwards, but and also at first they were kind of worn on like the outside of the garment, and then over time they kind of go into the inside. And the general shape of these farthingales were they were cone shaped. Um, and they were introduced to England early in the 1500s by Catherine of Aragon, one of the wives of Henry VIII. Um, Also worn primarily by the wealthy, as we said. Um, rich people have access to things that the poor do not. Um, cool. Anyway, so later on, the cone shaped farthingale gives way to the French wheel farthingale or the drum farthingale, which becomes popular in England around the 1590s. It looks like a drum. It's a table. Um, you could probably put a meal on there. Uh, so they were popular through around this 1620, and the size of the skirt is kind of like dependent on not just like location and time where you are in time, but also like where in the world you are. Like um, fashions are different from country to country, and trends don't really, obviously they don't travel as fast as they do now. So a lot of times you have like very very different styles of wearing something, even like in different European countries. Um, So we're going to move in time to um, the 1680s. We just as a note, we are going to be skipping around in time a lot because we're going. I've kind of structured this PowerPoint to go off of like uh, things that are related to each other rather than like a chronological order of things. So hopefully that doesn't get too confusing, but it made sense in like my head. So we'll see. Anyway, so 16 what did I say? 1680s. So we have something called the robe de cour, which is basically French for like court dress. Lots of courts have court dress, but specifically the French variant was um, required by Louis the. Hold on. 16? 16. I all of a sudden forgot numbers. Um, in the 1680s, and specifically the French variant, was intended to improve the economy by increasing production of luxury goods. So the French robe de cour had like ruffles on the sleeves that were made of French lace because they wanted the aristocrats to buy French lace so that it would stimulate the economy. He also exempted the aristocrats from taxation, and he also encouraged them to buy a lot of stuff. Um, this is not something that I read recently, but I was told one time by like one of my professors that another reason that he may have been encouraging people to dress up so much is because if you're spending all your money and time on fashion, you have less time to and money to spend on uh, rebellion or overthrowing the government. Um, yeah. And so at first, the robe de cour is a stiff bodice that is separate from the skirt. It's two separate kind of like things. And it also like may have had detachable sleeves. It laces up in the back. And this variant of court dress stopped after the French Revolution because, and but in English court, English court, they continue to use court dress and like the mantua, which is something that we're going to cover later. So in the midst of this, panniers become kind of get introduced into this. They are just very wide undergarments that make your hips super big. Starting in like the 18th century, they take on like this new shape, and it gets really, really big in the 1750s or like the middle of when they were popular. Because I feel like I don't know, the middle of times is when they're the largest. That's not based on anything. But yes, you can tell from these images that like these are very extreme. They're extremely wide. Um, uh, Not necessarily. I mean, you probably couldn't use it as a table because it's not as like round as the drum farthingale, but like you could definitely not have to stand next to people, which is great. Love that. So in around the 1740s, we get a garment called the robe à la française, which is an open robe in that the back of it is pleated, and so it's not like sewn into the back. It's like it's drapey and soft, like soft. It's pleated, and it comes from earlier styles of like kind of more relaxed like dresses, um, but it it starts off as like more of like a home dress where you're like, I am so comfortable, I'm so relaxed. But it over time becomes more formal. It comes from the mantua. It also comes from the robe volante, which is the ultimate sack dress. Unfortunately, I don't have like time to go over robe volantes, maybe later. But these specifically were a garment that was worn with peignets. Oh yeah, sleeves. We are going to cover sleeves later, but I didn't put in a thing about sleeves for these guys. But yeah, so typically they are kind of at the elbow or below the elbow. But you see like there's lace on the cuffs. Those are actually detachable. Um, Lace is really expensive. Delicate, handmade. You take it off, you wash it, whatever. Obviously, again, only rich people. Um, and these detachable sleeve thingies are called engagement. They're super duper fun. So first comes the robe à la française, and then comes the robe à l'anglaise, which is a closed-body dress. You don't wear it with a panier, but it's still like wide and poofy. It is it's like one of the variations of court dress, and it's made to be worn kind of like with the overskirt open, so you reveal the petticoats underneath. Which over time those get like more decorated, and you embellish them and that kind of thing. Note about petticoats, uh, those used to be like full undergarments, and then later on they turn into a underwear skirt thing that we wear, but um, petite coat. It used to be a small coat. It was like a full dress that became a skirt um, to us. Um, and so the bodice and corsage could be different. You could have it decorated different ways with ruffles or bows, or you could just have your like stomacher like kind of decorated like that kind of thing, or you could have it completely covered. Um, and the Robella Polonaise, which I will also go over later, is also becomes popular like in the midst of this, and so you get both the robe à la française and the robe à la anglaise. Um, they become like polonaise, which is like when you drape the back of the skirt up, so it like kind of forms a bustly looking thing. Bustles are a whole thing. We'll go over them later. And so here I've collected a couple of dresses that are 18th century inspired because obviously Lolita dresses super, super inspired by this time period and specifically like historical figures of this time period. Um, as you can see, this angelic, pretty Pompadour OP is directly inspired by this painting of Madame Pompadour, down to like the colors and the embellishments and that kind of thing. Oh, another thing to note is like you see sometimes you get like the wiggly S shapes on like the sides of the overskirt. Those are called robings, and that's another feature you see a lot in Lolita um, inspired, or sorry, uh, 18th century inspired Lolita dresses. You get like the squiggly S ruffles. Um, but yeah, when you see Lolita garments like that have like the ruffles on the front and like the rows of bows and like the elbow length sleeves with the ruffles on the elbow, um, and like maybe an open skirt, these are all kind of indications that are they are inspired by that period in time. Here are a couple that are specifically inspired by Robe à la Française to the point where they actually have the pleated back. You can see in the Baby the Starshine Bright variant that it is not actually a real, like, it's not actually open. It's just like a cape that hangs on the back. But um, my love Antique Beast actually has one that is like truly like a pleat that opens up in the back. So um, that's really beautiful and I love it and I would like one. They do come in black, so I don't know. Maybe I'll buy one at some point. I don't know. Who knows? We're moving into the 1830s to 60s, um, which are crinolines, another time period where skirts are really, really big. Crinolines first referred to like a stiff fabric with a weft of horsehair and a warp of cotton or linen thread. But at some point, they become steel hoops, um, and they are considered more freeing and like less cumbersome by the people who are wearing them because they replaced like your layers and layers and layers of petticoats. Um, which before this, in like the 18, I guess in like the 1830s, they, there was like a time period where there's like, well, you don't worry about it. We'll cover that later. Anyway, it replaces your layers of petticoats. And also something to note about this is actually crinolines were accessible because they were, well, accessible in the financial sense in that they were worn by all classes of people. Um, some comics that I like, some satirical comics that you come across, there are satirical comics about fashions across all times because people hate it when women wear clothes, trendy clothes that are new and different. Um, but specifically crinolines, you do see ones where it's like, oh, like the skirt is so big. But there's also ones where it's like a lady who's like, oh, like how dare my maid wear a crinoline? Also, that's outrageous. Um, but they were able to be worn by people of all classes. Um, and here's a couple more examples. You can see in the 1860s is kind of when the crinoline reaches its full circumference. Um, and after that, it changes shape a little bit. Here's a satirical comic where it's like, oh, like ladies can't put on the crinoline by themselves because it's too big, it's too cumbersome. And there's another picture that you sometimes come across where it's like maids with like these sticks lifting a crinoline onto like a woman. That one's also like not real. It's a satirical image. Um, but you know, you often see like these kind of exaggerated claims about fashion, making fun of them because trendy women. Am I right? So here's some examples of like this time period inspired Lolita. Victorian inspired Lolita could mean any number of things, and so here's like some ones that are like more day wear inspired. Here's also some that are more evening inspired. In like the 1840s, the skirts are all, still a little bit plain, and going into the 1850s, you start to see more tiers, and then after that, they also become more embellished. So you can see like um, you've got your tiers, you've got like your different trimmings and that kind of thing. Okay, so from there, we are skipping all the way into the 1950s. Um, the new look, which is the post-war era where Christian Dior comes out with a new look, which is kind of uh, it's after war rationing lifts in I guess like France and the U.S., but not necessarily England. I think England was like very slow to lift their uh, um, their rations on fabric, and people were like very mad about it. But basically, you're able to use more fabric now, and so with this new this ability to um, use more fabric, and also with kind of just like increased wealth, people are able to afford more clothing. Um, so with that, you've got like you're using bigger skirts and that kind of thing. So here we have an example of like 1950s circle skirts. They're literally just like cut from a circle. They're appliqued with like their felt applique. Very cute and simple. Um, you've got several examples of like different ways that they could be gathered. So you've got like pleats, you've got gathers, um, and also different necklines like halter tops and like boat necks are pretty common. 1950s prom dresses are something that I think are really fun and interesting because they're like very extravagant. You got like your layers and layers of tulle, um, and it kind of does remind me of like Lolita. Like when you get Lolita dresses, are like so many layers of um, tulle and like ruffles and that kind of thing. And I have an image here of a 1960s ad. Again, like I said, just because a decade ends does not mean that people stop wearing a certain thing. So, people still wear full skirts in the 60s, at least in the early 60s. It's quite common. Um, and then you get like a bunch of different other waistlines that become popular. Anyway, also children's clothing. As you can see, these are like super Lolita. They're so fun and cute. Um, you see like lots of like sailor imagery and like pinafores, um, and like tears, and um, I think that 50s children's clothing, especially, just it really speaks to me like in terms of like that. Yes, I I associate myself with this. And here we have some 1950s inspired Lolita. Something to note about 1950s inspired Lolita is like it's very, I don't know, like stereotypical is the word for it, but you can tell that they are definitely taking certain motifs from the 50s where you're like, ah, yes, that's the 50s. Um, and I think it might have something to do with the kind of like um, revival of the 1950s in the 1980s. At that in the 80s, you get like a lot of movies and like trends and stuff that kind of uh, reimagine the 50s, but in this like very like, oh, we're only taking like these certain elements. So your circle skirts, your poodle skirts, your like greasers and moto jackets, your polka dots, cherries, all of these things. Um, these are like 50s things, right? And so those are the things that Lolita took. And when you have like these designs, it's kind of really picking and choosing. Oh, are we talking about 40s? Yeah. I have like one short 40s thing. The skirts aren't very big at the time, so like it's not like a huge thing, but we are going to go a little bit. I really do love like 30s and 40s, but it's tangentially like, well, everything's like tangentially related to each other in terms of like fashion history. There's nothing that's not connected to each other. Um, so that's our full skirts portion. Um, Next, we're going to go into bustles. So we're moving like back in time again. I'm sorry. So the mantua is a garment that's popular from 1670s to 1750s. It in the beginning, it's more of like a really informal gown. It's like really again comfortable. It drapes all the way down and like kind of trails onto the ground, and then over time it becomes more formal. This is something that you find with all fashion, pretty much actually. Things that are considered super informal, like a tuxedo or jeans. They all eventually make its way, like slowly, through the process of formality. Um, and so, uh, it they refer first they were like cut from like one piece of fabric, and then eventually over time they're cut separately. The train becomes cut separately from the bodice and no longer trails in the ground so much. Um, and there become people called mantua makers, which are just dressmakers, and they're usually women, and they cut clothing that fits like closely to the body. Um, so, and as I said before, the mantua is also like the kind of predecessor of things like the robe à la française, and you can see here why, because of like the back, the stuff that goes on in the back. Um, and then we have the robe à la polonaise, which refers to the arrangement of like the overskirt into like this bunch thing, um, where you can display the width of like your petticoat. Um, it is cut without like the waist seam in the back, so oftentimes you see things that are called robe à la polonaise, but it's actually you can have like both robe à la française and robe à la anglaise. They can be like polonaise. You just bunch it up basically, and so, um, but specifically this one is the actual robe à la polonaise. It's the back is one piece and it's like bunched up. Um, and these are kind of bunched up in a way that's like not dissimilar to the way that we find bustles on things nowadays, where you've got like the cord and you draw it up. Sometimes you've got like a button and like a loop, and you drape it that way. Sometimes you like pull in a cord. There's different ways that they have for making the bunches. And then we're skipping again in time to Victorian bustles, which are a whole thing. As you can see, the rise and the fall and the rise of Victorian bustles happens in a pretty short time period. So we're going to go over that. So before Victorian bustles come into being, we've got the pre-bustle, like kind of shape of crinoline, which is more of like an elliptical hoop. Remember how I said like the crinoline, the super round crinoline, becomes another shape. It travels towards the back in the 1860s. So 1850s round, 1860s butt, and so during this time, it's kind of like an in between time. You can see like there are some like decorations on it, where you're starting to get like the drapiness and decoration of the back of the dress. And then you have the first bustle period, which starts kind of in the 1870s. The first ones were higher in the waist, and the drapings were symmetrical. They consisted of a narrow hoop skirt with hoops in the back and the like supports that made it stand out. It was like the soft bustle period. Um, Later on, the bustle kind of like falls down and then it goes back up again. But you can see that um, it's a fashion that is worn by like both adults and also children are given bustles to make their butts look really big. Um, and then you can see the last image, which is the 1876. This is when you start to get the bustle falling down the butt. So it first it starts kind of high up and then starts to fall down until you get to, oh, here's another picture of the first bustle period. I really like this image because it shows you all the different designs that like potentially could have been worn for like different bustle shapes. And um, the one that especially stands out to me is the ones that's like the tears, because I think that's a version that Lolita's kind of replicate the most, probably because it's like maybe the easiest thing to wear with Lolita is like you have your tears with ruffles in the back because it's a little bit more rare. Obviously, you do get Lolita dresses that have like the actual pull up ones, but it's a lot more common for us, I think, to wear the tears. Um, let's see. Okay, then we're going into the natural form period, which is again bustle falls down. So during this time, you get like the skirt to be a lot more tight in the front, almost like a mermaid shape, and then you get embellishments just going further and further down the back of the dress. Um, and so there's a time period in like the wide range of Victorian time where skirts are not that big. They're actually quite narrow. They just have a lot of ass emphasis. So then after this comes the second bustle period, which I call shelf ass. I'm sure other people also call it shelf ass because it's straight up just a shelf. The difference between the first bustle period and the second bustle period is that the second bustle period, it looks like the bustle is sticking straight out like of your butt, 90-degree angle. And also during this time, you have like different styles of draping. It tends to be like you find like more asymmetry and kind of like more drapiness in like different designs and that kind of thing. Not so symmetrical. Um, and the first bustle era is also sometimes those are also sometimes referred to as polonaise because it is a revival of the original polonaise dresses. Um, which the whole theme of this is like fashion revivals. Haha, we are now in the 1930s and 40s. So, funnily enough, in the 30s and 40s, you do get a lot of dresses and designs that have a lot of ass emphasis as well. Um, in the 30s, the shape is like really quite narrow. You get lots of things cut on the bias, and it's like very figure skimming. And then in the 40s, it kind of like puffs back up again a little bit. But between like these 2 decades, you do have a lot of designs that focus on the back. And uh, I don't know. I didn't like actually do that much research about this, but I feel like um, so another thing is about the 1930s dresses that you see a lot of like backless dresses, and there's a lot of emphasis on like kind of the back. And the reason for that is a lot to do with the Hays Code, which is like a code of like censorship of movies in the 1930s and 40s, because there was this perception that films were like they had to be morally sound, so you couldn't show things that were like too graphic in nature. You couldn't like do swears, and you don't want to show like titties. So because fashion after like movies become a thing, fashion oftentimes follow very strongly like movies that come out. And so because movies stop showing like front stuff and they kind of focused more on like the back because that's what they were allowed to do, fashion also follows suit. um, this is like the extremity of like how fashion follows movies is like very extreme at this time. Maybe because they're like kind of newish, but you had like whole studios that were selling garments from like like fashion houses that would sell recreations, like licensed replicas of like things that came out in a certain movie, and like people would like go buy that, right? Anyway, so also another super fun thing about the Hays Code was it also, because of morals, banned depictions of like interracial relationships, and also, of course, homosexuality, because of course it did. Hays Code. Anyway, but hey, Bustles, am I right? Yep. um, and so Lolita Bustles. Here's some variants of Lolita Bustles. As you can see, there's like, because like what bustle is defined as throughout time is like changed so much, or like, predecessors of bustles and that kind of thing. There's so many different variations of like how Lolitas have done bustles. And sometimes it is like drawing it up in the back. Sometimes it's the chiffon tiers. Sometimes it's like lace tiers. Sometimes it's like folded ribbons. And there are a couple of brands here and there that have actually put out like undergarments that do have like a built-in petticoat thing on the butt. So the Sheglet one has like a built-in petticoat. Another brand that does this, it's not a built-in one, but you can buy a thing called like a chabo from Milfleurs. Um, it's like a separate bum pad for like, I don't know, I guess it goes on top of your petticoat, and it's called a chabo for some reason, and I couldn't figure out why. I I tried looking up the word chabo, and it just directs me to like a breed of chicken, and so my best guess is that it's because it looks like a chicken butt. I don't know. Um, don't quote me on that. And anyway, and you also see like depictions of bustles and like longer dresses as well. Um, okay, so from here we're gonna go into empire waists. Oh, I've already been talking for like 40 minutes. Okay, I'm gonna probably gonna go over time. So either I'm gonna stop at some point and just like go, or if my tech people are okay with staying a little bit because I think I'm the last one of the night, I'll keep going. I don't know. You choose. So empire waist. Obviously, there are like high waists from way before this, but I just a lot of time. So we're starting with the chemise à la reine, or the just like a robe on chemise. So this was popularized or like made notorious. Um, oh, I looked at comments for a second. Okay, so this was kind of popularized and or made notorious by Marie Antoinette because she was painted in chemise à la reine, which that translation just means chemise of the queen, kind of. It's her chemise. Um, so other um, terms for it can just be like robe on chemise. There's a bunch of other things that it can be called, but nowadays you commonly see it referred to as chemise à la reine. Um, and so she was painted in it, and it caused a big scandal because it's a dress that looks like undergarments. A chemise is like an undergarment that you wear underneath your dress, and so it's like really like, oh my god, like the queen is wearing her underwear and she doesn't respect us, the French people. Um, yep. Cotton, uh, it was, even though it looks quite plain in comparison to like the robe à la française, robe à l'anglaise of what was popular before. It was cotton muslin was still considered a status symbol because it was um, delicate and white, and like therefore you had to take care of it. It could be like stained easily or tear easily, um, and so you can't really like do any kind of work or strenuous activity while wearing one. Um, and it was also expensive because it wasn't made out of like French fibers. It had to be imported. Um, and so another reason why people were scandalized by her popularizing these and wearing these was because she was not supporting the French economy. Um, it Something to note is that it's not like she was the first person to wear it. Um, Madame du Barry was painted in one 2 years prior, and because Marie Antoinette followed suit, it kind of people also had this perception of like, oh, she's not dressing like a queen; she's dressing like a mistress. And also because the garment itself originated um, not from France. It's popularized by women who came back to Paris from colonizing. Um, it was perceived as being worn by women of dubious virtue. There were, there were a lot of rumors about the queen at this time. People were really unhappy with her, and they spread. There's a lot of things that they said about like the time that she spent in private, which is like, oh, she slept with a ton of people and had affairs and stuff like that. But this dress is kind of related because it's easier to take on and off. So it's like, oh, it's because she's wearing this dress because she's fucking a lot of people in it. um, with the traditional court dress, it required attendees to like dress you and undress you and that kind of thing. So as I said, this dress came from another dress that was brought over to France from the Caribbean, um, known as the robe à la Creole. Um, um, you can see like the kind of influences in terms of like fabric. There are certain works that are like, oh, like obviously people who went to these places had to wear lighter garments, not as heavy because they were just in like a hotter place, and they were, it's more natural to just wear whatever suits the environment. And so a lot of times these women adopted uh, clothing that was closer to what the people who were living there were wearing. Um, and it's not, but it's definitely like not originated in France. Um, and also something that they brought over as well was the practice of washing this garment in like a blue rinse so that it looked more white, as opposed to white garments before this were like they had like more of a yellow tinge. Um, and so we have these images of like life in the colonies. Specifically, the first two are from an artist called Agostino Brunias. I think he is a colonialist painter who he depicted an idealized view of these colonies. So like you can see in these, it's like, oh, like everyone's super happy and it's like cool and exotic and like we're thriving. So it's basically propaganda, but also he's like a painter who depicted people of color in his paintings as like people with agency and individuals, not just like putting them to the side. So it's kind of like a, you know, and so sometimes the robe or sometimes the chemise dress is also known as a gole, which is still a type of dress that is worn on Caribbean islands today as a form of like national dress. It's white, it's a white color and full and like that kind of thing. Okay, we have also more pictures of chemise à Lorraine as like I don't know, like a symbol of feminism, I guess. Because it is a less restrictive garment. It um, so you had more agency if you were able to wear one. Um, Marie Antoinette preferred to wear this garment as opposed to traditional court gown because um, it took less time and she didn't have to have people put her into it, and she also wore it to kind of escape from public eye, um, where a lot of eyes were on her in court and stuff, and so it was also worn by a lot of early feminists of the Enlightened era. Um, Also because I guess white is a color of like freedom from corruption, um, and you have women painted in it who are like either controversial or like artists or like intellectuals, like that kind of thing. People who kind of wanted to reclaim a sense of individuality. Um, so Chemise a la Reine, it's a it's a can of worms. Anyway, here's some Lolita variants of the chemise a la Reine. Obviously, it's been a very popular dress to kind of replicate into the Lolita style. In the center, I have a dress by Candy Violet, which is an American indie brand. It was an American indie brand. And I think around this time, like in the Western community, after she made this dress for her brand, it was like a really, really popular silhouette for Lolitas to wear. But it's something that's kind of always been done throughout the time of Lolita. Um, and it's, fun and comfy. So after the chemise a la Reine, we move into the 1800s, where the somehow waistlines manages to raise even higher. At this time, it's like the neoclassical Regency era. White dresses were really popular because they were supposed to like be inspired by um, Greek statues, because they didn't know that Greek statues were, or like Roman statues, they didn't know that they were like painted. They were just like, oh, we're wearing white like the statues do. Um, Another like kind of reason why neoclassicism would have been favored was because Napoleon like painted himself and also Empress Josephine in it a lot to try and like legitimize his position as emperor. So you see a lot of like imagery of like I am like harkening back to those time periods to be like, oh, we are legitimate. And so the term empire waist refers to like an empire. 18 the 1800s is also like this kind of era of undress. People like really, I don't know, let loose. I don't know if that's like, I guess that yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it was kind of like an era of undress because they were like, oh, we're like letting it out and be more free because we're trying to be Roman and stuff. But as you move on in time, as you can see, again, we start to get more covered up and a lot more detailed. So at this time, you have a lot of like more medieval inspired kind of details. The dress slowly become more elaborate, and you often have like layers of like gauze are like embellished or like beaded like over other layers of fabric, that kind of thing. Oh, another super fun thing, not related to like any of this, I just wanted to call it out, is the incroyables and the oh no, I can't speak French, and the marvelouses, which is it was a fashion trend of the 70s, 80s, worn by aristocrats after the French Revolution, kind of like a we're aristocrats, but we're still alive kind of thing, but also like we'll just wear whatever now because everyone's dead. And so on the far left, as we've talked about like satirical comics and that kind of thing, but uh, this is like a comic making fun of this fashion trend where it's like, oh, they're like so bare, they're like basically wearing nothing. You can see her butt. Um, and like the men's clothing becomes like really tight, but there's like big collars, and like the women wear like lace up sandals because we're trying to be Greek. Um, and it's just overall like, a little bit silly. And again, like, I don't know, the whole aristocratic thing is a bit, but also it's like, I don't know, kind of fun because it's silly looking. I don't know. I like it. Okay, so here's some example of neoclassical or Regency kind of inspired looks that are, I don't know. I felt like they were a little bit more closer to the um, not early, but like later, later variants, kind of. And so, in the first one over here, I think is interesting because it's got like the higher collar that you kind of see later on, which is a little bit more inspired like by medieval ruffs. I've thrown in like the moitié one because it's made out like a net, which I thought like kind of was related to like how they had like their net embellished dresses. And this other like really cool dress that I found randomly on the library is an amazing example of Regency does medieval because as you can see, it's got like the um, sleeves are kind of like gathered, but also you've got like bit of like I guess chemise peeking through, and you've got like the high waistline, and I think that's just really really fun. From there, we're going to go into Edwardian fashion, another time in history where waistlines are really high. During this time, you have well, it in the like first bit, you've got this thing that's like called pigeon chest, which is like not really a high waistline. It's like when your chest goes like a puff, which honestly I don't think that's ever been a thing again because it was kind of like a travesty. But later on, waistlines do kind of travel up and up, um, and so during this time, they had a lot of Regency neoclassical revival where they often take elements of that time period and they wear as well. Um, and also, we've got tea gowns, which are like kind of more for wearing at home, but they're also like more comfortable. And also another super fun thing, another like weird fashion moment, aesthetic dress or dress reform, oftentimes said to be related to the arts and crafts movement, or artistic dress is another name for it. It happens between the 1860s and the 1910s. I'm pretty sure it's like a response to the Industrial Revolution and like how things become mass produced and like mechanicized. And so you get like this movement of artists who want things to become more like handmade. This has largely to do with like things like furniture or like, you know, uh, goods, crafts, that kind of thing. And so when you hear like arts and crafts movement, that doesn't necessarily have to do with like, I don't know, pasta and glue or whatever. Arts and crafts is like the term comes from this time in particular, it's like um, more about trying to make more handmade things. But the people, they also wanted to have like a more freeing way of dressing. And so they pulled heavily from like lots of other periods of time, Renaissance, medieval. Um, they pulled from like Regency, and so you see in this time period a huge mishmash of things. Um, like you can see like the kind of inspiration of like the sack back dress, the robe à la française, and a couple of these, um, as well as like the second dress. It's like obviously very Regency inspired. Um, and yeah, it's a little. It's supposed to be like a little bit more freeing and comfortable, and it's like, oh, you're so artsy. And here I have some dresses I kind of pulled for Edwardian revival. I don't know. I feel like Lolita's very like, oh, it just kind of looks like this. I just pulled some dresses that had some high waists. It's fine. The third one specifically, I was like, oh, that's like kind of tea gowny. It's fine. Um, in the 1970s, you get a Victorian Edwardian revival. I've heard this attributed to like the Little House on the Prairie being a show during this time. It aired between 1974 and also 1974 to 1983, and during this time you got your prairie dresses, your gunny sacks, so like high waistlines, like really romanticized, um, high necklines, or just like like ruffles, tiered dresses, and also as you probably know, Lolita has its roots in the 1970s, and so this is a period in time where I think we don't really talk about like Lolita drawing inspiration from, but like this is a really big one. And so here's we have some things that are like neo Edwardian revival, Lolita kind of 70s looking stuff. The first one is a Beatage dress that straight up just it looks like a gunny sax dress. That's just a gunny sax dress. The second one, I don't know, kind of looks it's like a little bit border of like 60s and 70s looking to me. Um, but I think the print's really fun. Third one, I thought like the lace up bodice kind of also looked um, gunny sax y because you get more like also references to medieval clothing mixed together with your Edwardian clothing mixed together with your Regency clothing. Basically, revivals of revivals of revivals, right? I also threw the last dress in there because, like, I know that Natural K is coming back in a huge way for like Natural K inspired Lolita, and obviously that's also going back to the 1970s. Okay, now we're going to go over drop waist or no waist dresses. Um, so we're starting in the 1920s for this because I know that a lot of people think about 1920s as just like straight drop waist dress down straight, right? Um, which is, that was a popular silhouette at the time. But another style of dress that was really popular was called the robe de style, which is a dress that was popularized by Lanvin, who originally I think she started as like a children's wear designer, and then she continued to make clothing for both children and for women. Um, and so like her logo is like a lady and little kid. It's very cute. But as you can see, these dresses have like a lower waistline, but they still flare out at the sides because they are specifically referring back to the panier. Wow, going back, a throwback. Um, and so she's not the only designer that did these. She's just probably the most iconic. And for a while, I had like a whole like thing about. I was like, oh, love Fonfon. She's great. She's amazing, which she is. These are very beautiful, and I love them. Especially the third one with like the train and like the decorated like 3-dimensional flowers on the hem. I think it's like so beautiful. I love it. Um, Something to note about sorry, that was the fourth one. Something to note about the one on the really right is it's one that when I looked up, it specifically called out that it had like, like Asian symbols on it, like uh, medallions and stuff that it's supposed to be like Asian inspired, and also just kind of to throw that out there, throughout this entire time that I'm talking about, there is fashion that pulls strongly from cultures from all over the world, but specifically when it comes to Asian culture and things and fashion. It's called, well, I mean, you get terms like Orientalism or chinoiserie. Chinoiserie is specifically the Western recreation of Asian motifs and items, basically for a Western audience. So you have Western designers or like clothing designers or furniture makers and that kind of thing making what they think is just general Asian looking things so that um, people in the West can buy them because these designs that like look like they're worldly also kind of like implies that you have class and wealth and it's like intellectual, like, oh, I like things that are worldly because I am well traveled, and so these become like status symbols. um, and this is especially interesting to me because we are in the Western community, like, you know, I assume people who are watching this, like, Western community of Lolita fashion, who wear a Japanese fashion that imitates Western fashion that pulls from Asian fashion. It's like a whole thing, and I think it's really interesting and fun. Um, we could talk about the whole cultural appropriation aspect of it, but when it comes to history, at some point, some of it is just like globalization and cultural cross contamination and that kind of thing. Anyway, so here we have some drop waist Lolita dresses. The first one I chose from Julie Justine because it's got like these kind of petals that I thought like really looked similar to that first dress. Like it's got like the pieces, or just like kind of more decorations closer to the hem, or kind of just like tiered dresses just lower on the waist, right? Bloop, bloop, bloop. We're discussing globalization in the chat, so good. And then we're gonna move into the 1960s, which also has drop waist dresses, kind of more like a just I don't know, kind of a revival of the 1920s. We're not going to get too heavily into it because, well, like you could find some Lolita stuff that's related. We're gonna rush on past through this. But I did collect some Lolita dresses that have a little bit, I don't know, I thought like maybe a little bit more 60s silhouette, and that's like straight outer. I don't know. Anyway, here's some examples of some Lolita drop waist dresses, just to show that Lolita is not just one silhouette; it's many. And we're still in the 50s and 60s now. We go on to the trapeze dress, which the term is created by Yves Saint Laurent in for Dior in 1958. It's an evolution of like an A-line silhouette dress, and it is, I think, one feature of it that's like really prominent or like stands out to me is that like it has more of like a really straight line down the back. Like it's just, you can see it's straight at the back. But these dresses specifically, I don't know, reminded me of Lolita sack dresses a lot, and so I wanted to call them out. Another thing we're going to talk about is baby doll dresses. It's first referred to as like kind of like a nightwear, like lingerie type of dealio, but becomes popular in the 1940s as nightwear because of, again, war rations. It takes less fabric to make, and it stays as nightwear until the 1960s, when Balenciaga makes a evening wear collection based on the baby doll, which interestingly to me, like it's a short dress, but it doesn't have it is a little bit more tent shaped. It doesn't have like the higher empire waist that we think of like baby dolls of today. And so through the 60s, you have dresses that are like super mini, and sometimes you see all of these referred to as baby doll style, like baby doll silhouette. And I couldn't necessarily find a indicator that it specifically had any kind of like specific waistline for a baby doll. Like I've seen a lot of dresses that are referred to as baby dolls, just like whatever, like waistline. Um, and so something I wanted to call out was that it's really interesting to me. But in the 1990s, you get a baby doll resurgence, and I kind of think like this is why we think of baby doll dresses as empire waisted, because Lolita from the 90s. So it makes sense, right? Grunge and Kinderhore were popular styles. Kinderhore was like a style that was like popularized by female grunge musicians, and they wore like kind of like 90s like that. It was supposed to be like subversive because they wore like childish, but also like they had really messy makeup. And I'm not saying like, oh, like Kinderhore and Lolita are related. I'm just saying I think the reason why Lolita baby doll dresses are referred to as such is because in the 90s, baby doll dresses become ubiquitously empire waisted. And this is just stuff that I don't know. This is just stuff that I thought about. I don't know if this is true or not. So here's some example of baby doll dresses. So if you look up the term baby doll on Lolita, you only get empire waist dresses. So I don't know. That was interesting to me. And as you can see, you've got all different kinds of like widths of skirt, but these ones, I don't know. These are all examples of Lolita baby doll dresses. Here's some more baby doll dresses. I just like them. I think they're neat. They're really good. I love it. And then we're going to go into, here's some example of sack dresses, which again, to me, kind of recalls trapeze dresses, tent dresses, that kind of thing. Now we're going to talk about sleeves. I know that I'm like over already, so stick around if you want, I guess. Oh no. Okay, so we're going to start with sleeves in the 1450s, kind of like starting kind of medieval. I found references to detachable sleeves starting in the 1450s, but in like the kind of 1490s, it's kind of when you see sleeves with like decorative ribbons where you can like see that they are detachable, and that was just kind of interesting to me as you know Lolita fashion has detachable sleeves, and I was like, I don't know where that comes from. I don't necessarily think it's like a medieval reference. I just thought it was fun. Um, and then so we have the image on the third image. It's a pane sleeve, which is a sleeve that's made out of like strips of fabric that reveals the garment underneath. And between the 1510s and 1530s, the puffs move like from along the arm just to the top of the sleeve, um, so that you can see like you know. Another thing to note, like slashing and painting are like both popular things at this time. Painting specifically refers to like the strips of fabric, and slashing refers to cutting into the fabric to refer or to reveal the stuff underneath. And then we got the sleeves of the 1570s, which are really, really huge. They just become really huge. In the 1580s, women's wear becomes like just big and stiff and layered, partially to do with Elizabeth I. She like had a really strongly curated image where she wanted to like convey power, and she did this by being really big, which I think a lot of us can relate to wanting. It's super heavily embellished. You can see that the sleeve like gets bigger towards the middle. Um, and the last one is called a virago sleeve. It specifically refers to a double puff sleeve with like a tie in the middle. She does look swole. She's hiding ginormous muscles under those sleeves, aren't it? Like, and I love how I don't know. I just think they're neat. And so here's some examples of Lolita puff sleeves. Like we all know what puff sleeves look like, but I don't know. I guess I thought these ones were kind of either Renaissance or like medieval looking. Interestingly to me, like the two on the end are obviously a little bit more in reference to like a certain character. Like there's a Snow White one, obviously. Then you've got like this one that looks just more like inspired by like fantasy. Um, oh, by the way, I'm doing a history panel for fantasy because I was like, oh, like fantasy is inspired by history, and then just it became like a whole history thing. I don't know. It's whatevs. But it's a little bit like less in reference to direct fashion history and a little bit more in reference to pop culture. Um, and I would argue that Lolita like is in equal parts in reference to both fashion history and also pop culture. Here we have some hanging sleeves between like the 1540s and 1610s. Um, at first you get like the puff sleeve at the top of the shoulder, and then it kind of like moves down so that you've got this puff at the bottom of your arm, and then you've got like these detachable under sleeves that you can like take off, and then also over time you see like these larger capey like hanging sleeves. And this is not like a super popular Lolita silhouette, but you do get some examples of um, kind of more drapey sleeves in Lolita from time to time. Okay, so here's a super fun one. I discovered that Michelin Man sleeves are not, they have a real name. That's not just Michelin Man sleeve, because that's what I've always called them. Um, they are either Mameluke sleeves, or I also see them referred to as Marie sleeves, possibly in reference to Marie Antoinette and her, chemise dress. And so, as you might remember, you've got like the kind of like more subtle puff, like of the robe en chemise kind of earlier on, and over time this becomes many puffs, to the point where this is what they look like, and I think they're wonderful. I really love them. You also see a revival of the sleeve in the 1860s, I think personally it's probably an evolution of the pagoda sleeve, which is like tiers of sleeves. But we'll get into that. Basically, what I wanted to say here was like, look at these. They're, it's so fun, right? Like they, they're the same. Anyway, so here's some Lolita Michelin men sleeves. We wear them a lot, and I've been calling them Michelin men sleeves, and I think they're cool and fun and neat. I mean, they could be squishy baby arms, but maybe they could just be muscles. Maybe maybe they're my muscles, all 10 of them on my arm. Um, Here we have another fun variant sleeve is like between the 1820s and 1840s. As you might remember in like the 1810s, you've got like the very tight kind of puff up on the top of the shoulder. And in the years after that, it falls down. It falls down the arm, right? And so you kind of have your big, like giant puff, and then you get puffs in like the middle of the elbow, and then they just move down gradually. Um, and while I think we're more used to Lolita dresses and like blouses having a puff on the top of the shoulder, if they're not Michelin men's sleeves, sometimes you do see kind of like dropped puffs. Or I think another thing is that right now, Chinese indie brands are doing like really interesting sleeves with their blouses, and so you get like lots of drop shoulder blouses with like puffs down the center or like in the middle of the sleeve. And to me, it kind of just it reminds me of like these guys. I don't necessarily know if it's like related, but I think it's interesting. Um, and then we have pagoda sleeves. These are popular between the 1840s and 60s. Pagoda, another, you know, Orientalism. It's supposed to look like a pagoda, like, you know, the things that ghosts slide off of. Um, and you might see why, like, I think that this evolved into the Victorian variant of the Mameluke sleeve because it's kind of like tiered. So, you know, you have your variants that are like tiers of sleeve, and then after a while, you have like the really big, just like draped, large shape of sleeve. And here's some examples of Lolita style trumpet sleeves, or like, you know, big guys. I included the one of Angelic Pretty in the center, not because it's actually pagoda shaped. It's just that because of like the tiers, it kind of reminded me of the like the layers, and it's not something that you find a lot in Lolita. I think at least not specifically like that style. So that one was interesting to me. And then obviously we're getting into the Gigo sleeve or the leg button sleeves. We love a big puff sleeve. Um, I have some images of how big, extremely large these sleeves got. They were very large. Um, they were kind of influenced by the puff sleeve of the 1830s, but just make it real big. And early on, they were cut into like two pieces where it's like one puff, and then you've got like a seam, and then you've got sleeve. And then over time, it also just becomes like a big lega lega mutton. Oh sorry, I haven't been reading the comments that much, but are Princess Hime sleeves the same as trumpet sleeves? I think that princess I think in terms of like Lolita, I don't know how much of a differentiation people make, but to me, Hime sleeves are like a little bit more, um, and they look a little bit more similar to the like 18th century sleeve that we went over with like the robe à la française and robe à l'anglaise with you know the engagement at the end where it's like got the ruffle at the elbow. But for the purposes of Lolita, I think probably if you were like go on Lolibrary and like look up princess sleeve, I think you just get anything that's like this. Um, yeah. Okay. Oh, and here I have puff sleeves from the 1980s because I think that the 1980s sleeves look really similar to Victorian leg of mutton sleeves. They're just really big and large. also kind of Renaissance inspired. Here we have a picture of Princess Diana, fashion icon, and we love her. Um, yeah, when I trumpet sleeve to me, it's I don't know. I think this like a that, and hime sleeve to me means like um, tight and then flounce. Yeah, 80s definitely reference Victorian. 80s also is like a very is very strongly influenced, I want to say, by the 1940s, which you see in the kind of like strong, like, you know, the shoulder pads. You get like really great shoulder pads in 1940s as well. Um, and again, the 1940s bustle is inspired by the Victorian bustle, and therefore you get lots of like kind of bustly things in the 80s as well, where you've got like draped fabric at the back, as well as peplums, which were really big in the 40s. Yeah. Um, but I don't know. I think the 80s gets a lot of shit, but I think it was fun. I think they were doing a lot, and I love that for them. And here's some example of more Lolita puff sleeves. Like, you know what puff sleeves look like. So I just took some of various sizes and shapes. Um, some sheer ones, some where like the puff is closer to the bottom of the elbow, and some where it's like kind of more high up top. I don't think a true leg button sleeve, like, you don't really see that in Lolita. So we do reference like puff sleeves a lot, but I really don't think that they're leg button sleeves. I think they're really more reference to like other puff sleeves throughout time. Anyway, so that's it. That's the end. I'm very over. Final thoughts. I think I thought I had final thoughts, but I said so many words throughout this entire presentation that honestly, like, I don't know. Final thoughts. Uh, Lolita fashion, is I think well, for me, really interesting because it is influenced by so many things that are influenced by other things, and it's a big, like, anachronistic mixing pot of references to different cultures and periods in time and pop culture references. And I think thinking I know I'm saying this after I give like a historical presentation about things that are influenced who that influence Lolita, but I think thinking too much about like trying to it's difficult to necessarily pinpoint where certain influences are coming from, right? Because those are coming from other places. And so I think it's like really fun in that you get to make it up. You get to mix all these different references to turn it into something new and something that like you get to choose the aspects of like things that you like. For example, you take a puff sleeve, but you like get rid of the racism, right? You get to choose. Um, and so I don't know. I think it's like, and also another final thought I had, I guess, was I wanted to kind of go over. I like, had ambitions about like having bits of panel at the end where I like showed off like different um, outfits that people like cords that people have worn that were specifically historically inspired. I didn't have time to do that, obviously, but it's really interesting to me because there are so many different ways you can style dresses, like Lolita dresses, to reference different time periods because of all these like different silhouettes that you can kind of dress up and like, depending on like how you accessorize it or how you style it or um, that kind of thing, you can make a cord look any different, like any like number of historical references that you want to do, and that's another thing that's like really fun um, to me. Anyway, um, I'm super over, but thank you all for sticking around. Um, this is the last panel of the night, and so you can all go to sleep and wake up bright and early tomorrow and watch some more fun panels. Um, thank you all for being here. It was a bit of a mess. I'm sorry. But as you can tell, I like fashion history. Um, I'm a messy bitch. Um, but yeah, that's where you can find me if you want to. But I don't know. Maybe I don't want to be perceived. Okay, y'all. I'm sure that some of you are in like way later time zones than me, so I'm gonna let you go. Okay. Goodbye. Goodbye. Someone's gotta stop the stream. Am I allowed to stop it?